Irwin in her first TV interview since her diagnosis with endometriosis.
When I got out of surgery, the first thing he said to me was, "How did you live with that much pain?" That validation meant so much to me.
She was the happiest kid on television, the little girl in khaki who grew up in front of tens of millions of viewers. So when Bindi Irwin posted photos of herself in a hospital bed this March, fans didn't just worry. They got scared. Yet her drastic transformation isn't a mystery, it's a paper trail. 51 of something has been removed from her body across 2 surgeries, and one night changed everything. So what was Bindi hiding for more than a decade? The Instagram post that ended 10 years of silence. The answer was endometriosis, and on March 7th, 2023, Bindi Irwin finally shared it with the nearly 6 million people following her on Instagram. For roughly a decade, one of the most recognizable young women on the planet had been quietly living with a disease she never once named in public. And by the time she did name it, the proof was already stitched into her body, because the surgery had happened just 4 days earlier. If you've never heard of endometriosis, here's the plain version. It's a condition where tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grows in places it shouldn't, attaching to organs, triggering inflammation, and causing chronic pain that can bleed into nearly every corner of daily life. It isn't rare. It is, however, notoriously hard to diagnose. And what happened next shows just how far Bindi had to go to get answers. To get treated, she didn't drive to a hospital in Brisbane. She boarded a plane and flew roughly 10,000 miles from Australia to New York City to reach one specific operating room at the 2nd Endometriosis Center inside Lenox Hill Hospital. The center's founder, Dr. Tamer Sekin, is one of the best-known excision surgeons in the world, and he also co-founded the Endometriosis Foundation of America. When someone crosses the entire planet for a single doctor, that tells you how specialized this operation was and how few hands she trusted with it. What Dr. Sekin found justified every mile. Over a procedure that stretched across several hours, according to the Endometriosis Foundation of America, he removed 37 separate lesions from her body, along with a cyst. That's not a cleanup procedure. That's a body under siege for years. Every one of those lesions represented tissue that had been growing, scarring, and causing pain, while the cameras kept rolling and the trademark smile stayed firmly in place. That detail reframes everything you thought you knew about her. Through Dancing with the Stars, through her wedding, through the birth of her daughter, through every cheerful video from Australia Zoo, this was happening underneath. She later described the diagnosis as validating, which sounds like a strange word for bad news until you realize what the alternative had been. Because the alternative wasn't health, it was pain with no explanation, stretching on indefinitely. And that's where the timeline turns uncomfortable. The surgery took hours, but the diagnosis took roughly 10 years, and 37 lesions don't appear overnight. They accumulate slowly, year after year, while a patient keeps being told that nothing is wrong. So the real question isn't what the surgeon found in New York. It's this: how many doctors looked at Bindi Irwin during those 10 years, and what did they tell her instead? Try meditation, the advice that delayed everything. They told her to drink tea. That's not a punchline, and it's barely even a paraphrase. Speaking on Kylie Kelsey's podcast, Not Gonna Lie, in June 2025, about half an hour into the episode, Bindi recalled doctors who responded to her worsening symptoms by questioning her mental state and suggesting she try meditation or a soothing cup of tea in the evenings. One of the most visible, best-connected young women in Australia sat in exam rooms describing real, escalating physical pain. And the professional advice she walked out with was, essentially, to relax. And this wasn't one bad appointment. On the podcast, A Life of Greatness, in February 2025, she remembered doctor after doctor offering the same reassurance, telling her this was simply part of being a woman and there was really nothing wrong with her, while she grew more and more unwell. In an interview with Today, she spelled out what daily life actually involved: Nausea, irritable bowel syndrome, severe stabbing pain, cramping, and fatigue, arriving almost every single day. That's not an occasional rough afternoon. That's a body sounding an alarm on a loop for years, while the people trained to hear it kept looking away. Her own summary cuts through it best. As she put it on Kelsey's show, it's not normal to be in pain. She wasn't exaggerating, and she wasn't being dramatic. She was describing her ordinary baseline. And she has said this pain stretches back roughly 13 years, into her early teens, which means the joyful little girl audiences watched grow up on television was already hurting long before anyone outside her family had a clue. Pain had become so constant that she'd stopped expecting life without it. It raises a question worth asking. If one of the most famous, best-resourced young women in Australia couldn't get doctors to take her pain seriously for a decade, what happens to the millions of women nobody has ever heard of? All of that context explains why the 2023 diagnosis landed the way it did. Most people don't celebrate being told they have an incurable chronic condition. Bindi told Today it was one of the most validating experiences of her life, because after years of being handed tea and meditation tips, someone had finally looked inside her body and confirmed that the pain was real, physical, and treatable. Validation, for her, wasn't a consolation prize. It was the first honest answer she'd ever received. For a while, the story seemed finished. The surgery was behind her, the validation had arrived, and for 2 full years, it genuinely looked like a happy ending. Then came May 10th, 2025. A glittering ballroom in Las Vegas, a gala built around her late father's memory, hundreds of guests waiting, and 2 seats that stayed empty all night. So what happened to Bindi Irwin in the hours before that gala? 2 empty seats at her father's gala. Her appendix ruptured, and it happened on May 10th, 2025, the exact day of the Steve Irwin Gala in Las Vegas, the annual event built around her father's memory. Out of all the days in the year, her body could have finally given out. It picked the one night dedicated entirely to her dad. The gala went ahead, but 2 empty seats told their own story. Bindi, then 26, was headed into surgery. Her mother, Terry, 60, made a decision that surprised nobody who knows this family. She skipped the event honoring her own late husband so she could stay at her daughter's bedside through the recovery. That left 21-year-old Robert to walk into a ballroom full of guests, explain why his sister and his mother weren't coming, and somehow carry the biggest night of the family's year alone. He was 21 years old, standing where his father should have been. He didn't hide his shock. Speaking with people that night, he reassured everyone that she was going to be okay, then admitted that out of all the things the family had been ready for, surgery was not one of them. And one detail makes the whole night harder to hear. Bindi had flown to Las Vegas, fully intending to attend. Robert later told Good Morning America that she arrived putting on a brave face, pushing through visible discomfort and pain, planning to tough out the most important night on the family calendar exactly the way she'd toughed out everything else for a decade. Then the surgeon ended that plan on the spot. As Robert recalled it, the verdict left no room for negotiation. No, your appendix is going. That thing's gotta come out. There was no version of the evening where she stood on that stage. After roughly 10 years of pushing through pain because doctors kept insisting it was nothing. The one time the medical system moved quickly for Bindi Irwin, it moved quickly enough to pull her out of her father's gala within hours. Notice the pattern underneath the drama. This is a woman who spent her entire life performing wellness for cameras, smiling through a disease nobody knew existed, and her instinct in a genuine medical emergency was still to get dressed and go on stage. That instinct is exactly what a decade of dismissal builds. When enough doctors tell you your pain isn't real, you eventually stop treating your own body's alarms as emergencies, even when one of your organs is failing. It teaches you to doubt yourself first. But almost every headline that weekend got the story wrong, because the ruptured appendix wasn't the real story at all. It was the door. In the hours between that diagnosis and the operating table, Bindi made one calculated decision, a move most patients in an emergency would never even think to make. And it's the only reason anyone discovered what had been quietly growing back inside her for 2 years. So what exactly did she do? The mid-emergency gamble that found 14 hidden lesions. She got on another plane. In the middle of a medical emergency, with a failing appendix, Bindi Irwin chose to fly across the country to New York rather than head straight into the nearest available operating room. And once you understand why, it might be the single smartest decision anyone makes in this entire story. Because the appendix, it turns out, hadn't come out of nowhere. In her own account of that week, shared on Instagram and reported by Entertainment Weekly, she revealed the organ had been what she called grumbly for many months before the gala. This wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow leak she'd been living with, the way she'd learned to live with everything, right up until the day of the gala, when the pain finally forced her to seek help. That's when she made the call that changed everything. She consulted Dr. Tamer Sekin, the same New York surgeon who'd removed those 37 lesions back in 2023, and together they agreed on a plan. If she flew to him, then, while the surgical team dealt with her appendix, he could also go back in and check whether her endometriosis had returned. It would be one operation delivering 2 answers, so she routed her emergency through New York City. On May 12th, roughly an hour after waking up from surgery, she posted a video from her hospital bed, and the inventory she shared was staggering. Her appendix was gone. Surgeons had also repaired a large hernia she'd been carrying for 4 years, an injury left over from the birth of her daughter Grace in 2021. And then came the finding that justified the entire gamble. As she wrote in her caption, "Surgery was a success. My appendix was removed, along with another 14 lesions. 14 new endometriosis lesions, and here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Nobody was looking for them. Those lesions weren't producing symptoms loud enough to send her to a doctor. If her appendix hadn't failed, and if she hadn't specifically asked her surgeon to take that extra look, the tissue would still be growing inside her right now, completely undetected. The 2023 surgery that everyone celebrated as the happy ending hadn't actually ended anything. The disease had returned in silence, and only this mid-emergency gamble dragged it into the light. Which leaves a question hanging over anyone who's ever been through a procedure like hers. She only found those 14 lesions because she asked for the extra look. So how many people are walking around right now with a successful surgery behind them and no idea what's quietly grown back? For Bindi, the answer arrived only because she treated her own emergency as an opportunity. That's a level of self-advocacy most patients are never taught, and she learned it the hard way through a decade of being ignored. Now hold those 2 numbers in your head, 37 from 2023 and 14 from 2025, because a few months later, in August, Bindi posted an update that quietly did the math for everyone. And when you add up everything that's been removed from this woman's body and how quickly part of it returned, the word worried starts to feel far too small. So what does the full count actually reveal? The number that explains everything. The full count is 51. 37 lesions removed in March 2023, plus another 14 in May 2025, comes out to 51 separate pieces of diseased tissue taken from the body of a woman who spent roughly a decade being told to try a cup of tea. That number didn't arrive in one dramatic announcement. It accumulated quietly across 2 years and 2 operating tables until Bindi herself laid it all out. She confirmed the tally on August 13, 2025, in a recovery update posted at age 27, and the lesions were only part of the inventory. Across those 2 surgeries, she'd also lost a chocolate cyst, the informal name for an endometrioma, which is an ovarian cyst filled with old, dark blood, and one she has said drove a huge share of her stabbing pain. Her appendix was gone too, and the hernia from childbirth had needed repair because, in her words, it had been unzipping.
All of it belongs to a battle she has said stretches back 13 years. The post also contained the sentence that tells you what those years actually cost. She wrote that she can finally function in everyday life without wanting to throw up or pass out from the pain. Notice what that quietly admits. Functioning without wanting to pass out was never her baseline. It was her goal, and in August 2025, it was newly achieved. There's no self-pity in the phrasing, which somehow makes it heavier. But the number that should really stop you isn't 51, it's 14. Those 14 lesions grew during the roughly 26 months between her 2 surgeries after an operation that was, by every account, a success. In her case, and every case of this disease is different, excision didn't mean cured. It meant cleared for now. That's the insight buried inside her own timeline that almost nobody has said out loud. The surgery so many headlines treated as the finish line was actually just a lap marker. And that's the honest answer to the question in this video's title. The transformation fans kept noticing the quieter presence, the long stretches away from the camera. The visible exhaustion was never some unexplained decline. It was the running cost of a documented medical war, fought across 2 operating rooms, 2 continents, and 13 years. By late 2025, that war finally looked won. The surgeries were done, the pain was managed, and the recovery was underway. Then March 2026 arrived, and Bindi posted something that sent fans straight back into panic. Photos of herself lying in a hospital bed.
2 months after that, for the 2nd year running, her seat at her father's gala sat empty. Was history repeating itself, or was everyone reading it completely wrong? Why the second empty seat means the opposite. Everyone was reading it wrong. The hospital photos that terrified fans this March weren't breaking news at all. They were memories, and Bindi posted them deliberately, for a reason she spelled out herself, hiding in plain sight in the caption most people scrolled straight past. March is Endometriosis Awareness Month, and on March 30th, 2026, she used it. The post looked back across the whole ordeal, describing the inescapable pain of having more than 50 lesions removed over 3 years and the suffocating feeling of being trapped inside her own body. It wasn't a bulletin from a new crisis. It was advocacy from a survivor, aimed squarely at the women still stuck in the years she'd escaped, still being handed tea and told to relax. Her message to them was simple and direct. No one deserves to suffer in silence. Then came the gala and the second empty seat. On May 2nd, 2026, at the 3rd annual Steve Irwin Gala at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, Terry, now 61, and Robert, 22, stood together and faced the question everyone kept asking. Their answer, delivered in a joint interview with E! News, was the opposite of alarming. "Bindi is doing so much better now," Terry said. The absence this time wasn't an emergency. Long international travel is simply what taxes her body most while she heals, so she stayed in Queensland. And Terry added, with obvious affection, that it's honestly less taxing for her to be home feeding crocodiles. That's the difference fans couldn't see from the outside, because the 2 empty seats look identical. In 2025, the empty chair meant a ruptured appendix and an operating room. In 2026, it meant a choice. Her family wasn't covering for a decline, they were protecting a boundary. For the first time in a life lived almost entirely on camera, through a khaki-clad childhood, reality television, and a decade of hidden pain, Bindi Irwin looked at the biggest night on her family's calendar and decided that her recovery mattered more. So after 15 years of performing wellness for the cameras, she finally skipped the show to protect her health. Is that the most worrying thing she's ever done? Or the healthiest? While the ballroom applauded in Las Vegas, she was home at Australia Zoo, surrounded by the animals her father loved, out of the spotlight by her own choice for the first time in her life. So that's the truth behind Bindi Irwin's drastic transformation. Not a mystery, but 51 lesions, 2 surgeries, and a decade of doctors prescribing tea. Do you think her openness will actually change how women's pain gets treated? And should she have gone public sooner? Tell us in the comments, because this story isn't finished yet.